So lately I've been thinking a little bit more about volume and, the question of how much volume do we need to stimulate our bodies to try to adapt to training and improve. If you don't do enough volume, you're not going to send enough of a strong enough signal to the body to adapt. But if you do too much volume, then you risk, overtraining, getting hurt. If you do like way too much over distance work, you might get some slow twitch shifts going on, or if you did too much lifting, So these are things that kind of bounce around in my head, and when I look at my training over the past years, I've tended to stay within a certain range of volume every day, regardless of my training frequency and training density. So that got me thinking, it's like, if I'm going to train less frequently and I do the same amount of volume that I did when I was training more frequently, then I'm doing less volume overall. And if I'm doing less volume overall, can I rely on that to be enough to stimulate change and cause my body to want to get faster? If you're looking at your own program, you might want to ask yourself, am I doing enough volume? Am I doing too much? How does it stack up compared to what I've done in the past? What you did in the past, did it cause you to get faster? Did it work for a while and then stop working? These are things to think about and pay attention to, because if you never push it, if you never push yourself and test, what is really the max that I can handle, you risk not getting as much out of your training. But on the flip side, if you're always pushing it to that point of, maxing out in one way or another, whether that's volume, whether that's speed, whether that's lifting, then you run other risks, overtraining, getting injured, and all that. I think it's important that at certain points in time, we have targeted periods where we're going higher volume, and then we follow up those periods with time where we're spending, and we're doing less volume. So you might have a 3-week cycle, medium volume the first week, high volume the second week, and then low volume the third week. And that way, every 3 weeks, you're working medium volume, high volume, and then you have that low volume week to recover. You should consider how you can manipulate volume within your training, and sometimes you might want to push it a little bit. Last year, I remember seeing a video from Matthias, our sprinter friend on YouTube, and he did 20 by 60. So that's a lot of volume. That's like crazy volume when it comes to fast sprinting. But then you look at his results, and he ran 20.6. So as long as you can stay healthy and do a lot of volume, I think it will be a more potent stimulus for the body, and you might have a better chance at adapting. You also might have a higher risk of injury, so you have to balance those things out. Over the years, there's been a lot of talk about, minimum effective dose, and the flip side of that is maximum recoverable volume. So on one hand, you have the minimum effective dose, which is the least you can do to improve. Then you have maximum recoverable volume, which is the most you can do while still recovering. So we have to find a balance between what's the minimum effective dose to cause adaptation, and then what's the ceiling on how much work we can do before we're just going to start falling apart, getting worse, and getting hurt. And we have to stay within those bounds, because if you drop below the minimum effective dose because you're scared to train and you're scared to push yourself, well, you're not going to improve, and then you're just going to, if you do the same thing you always did, you probably get the same results you always did. If we push it on the other end, there's the risks there. So, play around with it. Don't be so tied to like, oh, this book says I can only do 300 meters of fast sprinting in one day. That's not necessarily true. That might be true if you're trying to sprint 6 times a week. Well, yeah, then you're definitely not going to be able to do that much each day. But if you're only sprinting twice a week, then maybe you can get more out of each session by doing more volume, as long as the quality's high, and you'll be good. Yesterday in my session, I noticed that when I was doing acceleration, my acceleration times dropped pretty quick, or I should say got slower pretty quick. So my capacity for high intensity accelerations was not that great. But then I switched to some speed endurance reps where I was running like flying 40s, so accelerate 30 to 40 meters, then sprint as fast as you can for 40. And on those, I was able to maintain my times all the way through the workout. So when you look at something like that, say you're doing high volume training, and high volume is relative. High volume for you is going to be different than high volume for me. But if you're pushing it, you might start to see that certain aspects of your training can handle more volume and other ones can't. And that can inform you either to what your, fitness and capacity levels are for different types of work. It can also inform you as to maybe if there's an issue. For example, for me, I think I have an issue in transition. When I do a dynamic start, I run faster in the speed endurance zone than I do when I go from a crouch start or blocks. So that tells me there's some inefficiencies going on within my acceleration that I need to take care of and I need to, figure out. So as you're going through your workouts, if you only ever do, 3, 4, 5, 6 reps in a workout, you may never get to the point where you start to see where those qualities fall off, which qualities fall off and which ones can maintain. And you might never learn about yourself as far as what you can handle, what you need to work on, where the issues are. Because when we start to become fatigued, that's where the things that we're not so good at get a lot worse, and the things that we're pretty good at can stay pretty good. So like I said, for me, the acceleration fell apart, but my speed endurance was fine. So, maybe it's worth trying some higher volume sessions, but some caveats here. You have to make sure you're healthy. You don't want to do a high volume session or even a high intensity session when you have pain, when you have feel like an injury might be cropping up. You want to avoid pushing it, whether that's in the intensity or the volume area, when you have an issue going on. But if you feel healthy and all you've ever done is 300 meters per workout, maybe try 350, maybe try 400. Because if we're trying to master something like a 60 meter dash or a 100 meter dash, and we only ever do 4, 5, 6 sprints in a workout of high intensity, are we ever getting enough exposure to get technical changes, to get physiological changes, to get tissue changes? I noticed last week on Thursday when I did about 500 meters of sprinting, that the thing that was the most sore on me, other than maybe my hip flexors, was my obliques. And my obliques never get sore from sprinting. But because I pushed it beyond a level that I was used to doing and I went a little further, all of a sudden, wow, now my obliques are getting sore. So, you might start to see, just like how when you're looking at acceleration versus speed endurance and how one might be able to be maintained better throughout the workout and another one might not, you might also find that certain areas of your body are more affected, but you would never learn that if all you ever did was lower volume training, or if all you're ever doing was like minimum effective dose training. So these are the things that you can sort of learn when you push the volume in the workout a little bit further than what you're used to. Something might become more fatigued than what it typically gets to, and then you can learn from that. So for me, I learned, okay, I probably need to do that more. I probably need to get these guys, better conditioned, and maybe that'll help me in my sprint. Because if your obliques are not working properly, then how your hips are moving, if you were looking straight on at a person and how their hips move up and down as they sprint down the track, if the obliques are not conditioned well for the task at hand, then maybe you're not going to be able to sprint as well, So I don't know. These are just some ramblings that I think you might want to consider, you might want to think about, and you can apply this into your training by dabbling with the volume a little bit and, not being afraid to do an extra sprint, do a couple longer sprints or whatever it may be, whatever you want to do based on what you feel you need to work on when we're getting eaten up by ants. As long as you're healthy, as long as you're not hurt and it makes sense. You want to always be cautious, you want to be careful, you don't want to overdo it. But you also don't want to underdo it, because if you never train enough, then you're probably never going to get better. If all you ever do is go and squat 1 rep of squats at the gym, how long will that sustain before you stop getting better? So we can apply the same idea to sprinting. But I think one of the other things to consider is that the volume that you're doing in your session has to be, tied with how frequently you're training and how dense your training is. So training frequency is just how often you're doing anything, whether that's sprinting, lifting, tempo work, circuits, core, whatever. Anytime you're doing a training session, that plays into the training frequency. But the training density is how often you're doing the same thing. So how often are you doing acceleration? How often are you sprinting? How often are you lifting weights at a certain intensity level? The more dense your program is, also the more frequent, but really the more dense your program is, the less volume you can do each session. Now that brings up the question in my mind of, per session, is there a certain level we need to get to of amount of work for the body to want to dedicate resources, generate hormones, and get all the stuff to happen to recover? Is there a certain limit we have to get to before the body does that? And if we're training with a very high density schedule where we're sprinting 4 times a week and we can never do more than, say, 250 meters of sprinting in a workout, well, maybe the minimum that you need to do is 300 meters to get your body to adapt, but you're training so frequently that you can't, do that because you're training so often. And if you were to do that, you wouldn't be able to train the next day and doing what you want to do. So maybe there's something to be said for having more potent doses of stress that are spread out over larger periods of time. So we do a very high stress workout, like yesterday, around 700 some odd meters of sprinting at a high intensity. And then I'm not going to sprint for a couple days so I can recover and come back and do another good session. So at a certain point in your training career, you might get to a point where the 250 meters, the 300 meters, the 350 meters of sprinting volume is not enough to cause adaptation. And that's where you have to play around with your density and your frequency, do more each session, but spread it out more. Now I may, be completely off base. Maybe if I just did one sprint every day, I would be running the fastest ever, but I don't believe that that's the case. And because I haven't pushed the volume per session in a long time, now I'm starting to do it, and hopefully we'll get something beneficial out of it. Maybe not, but if not, you'll be able to see it, and you can learn from my mistakes. If it works, then you can learn from that as well and apply it to your own training. Since I saw Matthias working as hard as he does, doing as much work as he does, and he's able to handle it, I thought, well, heck, I might as well take that concept, apply it to my situation as best as I can, and see what happens. So that's what we're going to try. That's what we're going to do for the current period of time, and we'll see how it works. But that's all I got for you guys today. I'll catch you guys next time. Cody Bidlow with sprintingworkouts.com and ATHLETE.X.